Cemetery in the schoolyard. Junior high second graders Toshihiko, Akira, Takeshi, and Hideki were behind on their prep for the cultural festival, so they decided to stay behind to finish up. They worked hard yet stealthily so that no teachers saw them. Before long, one of them said, "Hey, let's go home." They worked so hard that they didn't realize it was already nearly midnight. All four of them were together, so they didn't feel scared. "I'm looking forward to the real thing at the festival," one of them said as they went to leave school. But then suddenly, Toshihiko stopped on the spot. "Crap, I left my watch in the classroom." But nobody wanted to go back. "Just leave it there. You can get it tomorrow morning." "We don't have school tomorrow, and that watch was a present. I'm gonna go get it." "All right, we'll wait here then. But if you're not back at 12 on the dot, then we're gonna leave you here. My watch is 3 minutes late, so wait until 12:03, okay?" Toshihiko then ran off by himself. The other three looked at the clock on the wall by the entrance and waited. When that clock hit exactly midnight, Takeshi looked outside to the schoolyard. "Ah," he said. Akira and Hideki then also looked outside and immediately froze. Before them stood a graveyard as far as the eye could see. It was almost like it had popped up out of the ground, covering the entire yard. In the moonlight, they saw the gravestones and wooden grave tablets all over. All of them were old, leaning to the side and surrounded by dried grass that blew silently in the wind. And on the brittle ground lay numerous headless Jizo statues. As the three of them stood there frozen, like they were paralyzed, Toshihiko came running back. "Hey, sorry to keep you waiting," he said, but then his eyes moved to the schoolyard. "Huh?" And just like that, he froze too. As the four of them stood there, stock still, suddenly the alarm on Toshihiko's watch started to ring, letting them know it was midnight. As they came back to their senses, they all relaxed and the graveyard before them disappeared. Now, all they saw was the regular schoolyard. It turned out that long ago, that area used to be a graveyard until it was knocked down to build the school. After that, the four boys were unable to pass straight over the school grounds. They clung to the fence on the edge and followed it around to get inside. After all, they didn't want the ground to suddenly break beneath their feet as the graves broke out again. The piano-playing ghost. It happened once practice for the music club was over and we were putting our instruments away. Hiromi-san, who just closed the window, suddenly said, "Hey, did you know that there's a single grave partway up that mountain over there?" "Huh? Where? Where?" We ran over to the window and looked outside. "You girls are telling your beloved ghost stories again, huh? Well, we're gonna go home," the boys said before leaving. The rest of us girls climbed up on the window and looked at the mountain. By the elementary school's rear gate, there were fertilizer, bicycle, and stationery shops. Behind those were several farmhouses, and then a small hill. From our classroom on the 4th floor, we could see the tea fields on it. Hiromi-san pointed to about halfway up the mountain. "Look, just over there above that tea field. It looks like it's facing us." "Whoa, it looks like it's looking right at the school. That's creepy." "Hey, whose grave is that?" "I heard that it was one of the old music club members. My sister heard it from the janitor when she was in the 6th grade." Hearing that, everyone suddenly fell quiet. Then someone said, "We should ask the janitor what they were like." "Well, I have cram school," a few girls said, but the rest of us then went over to the janitor's room to talk to him. "Ah, that girl," he said, and then he told us her story. Let's see. It happened about 10 years ago now. No, maybe even longer than that. There was a girl by the name of Yoko-chan who lived in a house beyond the rear school gate. She loved music and she was in the music club, just like you. She was especially good at the piano, but she didn't have one at home. When she started the 6th grade, she got special permission from the teacher to use the school's piano after school for practice. I had the key for the music room, so I know quite well about it. She came to get the key to practice every day without fail. "Are you going to be a pianist in the future?" I asked her, and she nodded happily. The days were getting shorter, and it was around autumn when the roads were already dark by 6 p.m. It wasn't long until the piano recital, so she was practicing extra hard. One day, she came to get the key from me like always, and then went up to the music room on the 4th floor. I don't think it was very long after that an ambulance came down the back road, and everyone was running around. I also ran outside, and there were people gathered everywhere around the rear gate. As I got closer, I heard people saying that a child had been hit by a car. Was it one of our students? I thought, and I rushed over to check, but the ambulance had already left. I asked the person next to me who was hit. Apparently it was Yoko from the Yamada-san house just over there. There's no way! She's practicing in the piano in the music room right now, I said, but my heart was pounding. I ran back to the school and all the way up to the 4th floor. Both the door and the piano lid were open. But Yoko-chan wasn't there. So then, it was her in the accident. She died shortly thereafter at the hospital. I later heard that she forgot her notes for the recital that day, so she rushed back home to get them. But on the way back to school, she was hit. Her parents put her grave on the mountain behind the school, so she can see the music room with her beloved piano. I can only imagine how much she wanted to play the piano at that recital. After that, we often heard rumors about Yoko-san. There were some boys who went to see her grave and they told us, "There's a small toy piano in front of it." We got deeper into autumn and the music recital was approaching. We'd entirely forgotten about Yoko-san by then. And we stayed behind at school every day practicing hard. The music room was the only one in the dark school with lights and noise. Then one day, after we'd finished practice and we were all at the front gate about to leave, I realized I had forgotten my lunch bag. I went back to the 4th floor alone to get it. The only lights were the dim emergency lights in the hall, and the science, art, and special classrooms were all pitch black. The music room, that had been so lively just moments ago, was also now completely silent. I traced my hand along the walls and then tried to open the door. But then, I heard the sound of a piano coming from inside. I froze on the spot, unable to move. I couldn't even speak. The sound coming from the piano seemed to be a sad song. I don't remember how I got back to the entrance. When I told the teacher and boys about my story, they returned to the music room one more time to check, but they apparently didn't hear any piano sounds. But after that, numerous people said they heard the sounds of a piano coming from the empty music room after school. Hiromi-san also apparently heard it when she went ahead to club practice by herself one day. The teachers didn't believe us, but we definitely heard it. I fully believe that it was Yoko-san coming to practice. Sound of water from the toilet. In the countryside, there was a one-story wooden elementary school. 30 years after it was built, The floorboards in the hall were nothing but patchwork, and the classroom windows were full of gaps as well. Finally, it was decided to rebuild the school, so a prefab building was set up in the south of the schoolyard. It was rare for the children to see a new school building, even if it was prefabricated, with the smell of fresh paint and everything new except for the desks and chairs. They were especially happy with the new flush toilets. The toilets in the old school were the type in the ground, and in summer they stank so much it was hard to breathe. Plus, it was so dim in there that the dark hole in the ground was creepy. There were numerous rumours surrounding those toilets like, "I saw someone looking at me from below," or "A pale hand reached up and touched my backside." Around the end of September, the old school building was knocked down, and construction began on the foundations for the new one. One of the fresh new teachers was on day duty, and he had to stay behind late at school. It had been gently raining all day, and he thought to himself that it was about time to head home. But then suddenly, it started raining much heavier than before. A heavy wind also picked up, shaking the Zelkova trees surrounding the school, and, in the end, it almost turned into a storm. The roof of the prefab building was made of corrugated iron, so the rain was so loud it almost made him want to cover his ears. "I can't return home in this." He lived a 30-minute bike ride away, so he couldn't do much in this heavy rain. He looked up at the clock on the wall, and the hands pointed to 7 o'clock. "Well, I don't have much choice but to wait and see." Still, even though it was September, it was chilly enough to sneeze. The small room next to the staff room was full of the desks, chairs, and other items that they had used in the old school building. He grabbed an old emergency blanket, wrapped it around himself, then sat down to read a magazine. He quickly warmed up. Perhaps his exhaustion from the day caught up with him, however, because he soon lay his head down on the desk and then fell asleep. He didn't know how long he slept for, but suddenly he woke up needing to use the toilet. The rain had stopped at some point, and everything was quiet. Letting out a big yawn, he checked his watch and saw it was 2 a.m. It's so late. Panicking, he stood up and left the staff room to go to the toilet. The toilet wasn't in the main building, but was connected to it via a 3-meter-long hall. The boys' toilets had urinals on the side with windows, and then there were 5 stalls facing those. They were designed so that the doors opened inward when nobody was inside. The teacher turned on the light switch at the entrance, went in, opened his zipper, and began his business. But then, he suddenly heard the sound of a toilet being flushed behind him and water flowing. He jumped in surprise. "Who's there?" He screamed and turned around, and the door was closed on the 4th stall from the entrance. "Is someone there?" His voice came out high-pitched, and his knees trembled. Panicking, he rushed over to the 4th stall and knocked on the door several times. But there was no response. Again he knocked. But still there was no response. He felt sweat forming on his back and sides. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the door handle. Then, without a sound, the door opened inward. There was nobody inside. The teacher sighed and wiped the sweat from his brow. Still, he had definitely heard the sound of the toilet being flushed just now. Banging his head, he looked inside the toilet stall once more. There was nothing there but a Western-style toilet with a white tank, and he couldn't sense anyone either. "I must have been imagining things," he convinced himself, and after rinsing his hands, left. But then, suddenly, once again, he heard the sound of the toilet being flushed. Volleyball. The school Megumi attended, M Girls High School, was well known for its strong volleyball team. Megumi was strong and tall, so she started playing volleyball from the first grade of junior high, and was quite good at it. And so, when she started at M Girls High School, she happily joined the volleyball team. She wanted to become the strongest player on the team, and then finally battle the strongest teams in the world. But unlike her time in junior high, practice for the volleyball team in high school was much harder. When training was done for the day, it was like her legs and back were going to give out. I want to quit. My body's going to break down. She had this thought often. But even so, by the end of the first semester, something incredibly happy happened. Megumi, do you want to play in the next match against A Girls High? Mr. Yasuda, the coach, asked her. She was asked to play in the first semester of the first grade. Megumi felt on top of the world and immediately told her mother. And in their game against A Girls High School, they posted a difference of 8 points over 3 sets and won all 3 matches. Megumi showed off her specialty, her serves and spikes, and everyone focused on her. She also showed off some quick blocks at the net, which everyone thought was cool. But it wasn't a perfect game. She wasn't very good at passing. She wasn't very good at underhand passing, a way to receive low balls. And so, the ball would fall a step behind her. Hey, you don't receive it like that, and you're too slow. Mr. Yasuda zeroed in harshly on her weak point. Megumi quickly wanted to get better. She ended up staying behind after the rough practices more and more. She practiced underhand passes over and over by throwing the ball at the gym wall. One day, at the start of the summer holidays, Megumi suddenly caught a cold. This is nothing. She had confidence in her health and continued practicing even with a fever, despite the fact it wasn't very good for her. Her stomach pain worsened, however, and when she visited the doctor, she discovered she had peritonitis and was hospitalized. But just 1 short week later, they were unable to help her, and Megumi passed away. But she was so healthy. Nobody could believe it. Before long, people started to whisper about hearing a ball bouncing in the gym late at night. The first person to hear it was a young security guard. That night, he was patrolling the school like always around midnight when he suddenly stopped in front of the gym. Oya? He could hear the sound of a ball bouncing coming from inside. No way. This gym should be empty. With trembling hands, he nervously unlocked the door. Then, he shone his torch in the direction of the sound, and was shocked. He saw a single volleyball in the light, bouncing around. There's nobody here, and yet the ball is... A chill ran down his spine, and he shrank in horror. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He felt in grave danger. Yet, next thing he knew, he was lying down in the janitor's room, unaware of how he got there. The next day, the security company informed the school of what happened, and an emergency meeting was held. This wasn't something the school could ignore, so the vice principal and Mr. Yasuda, the volleyball coach, decided to get to the bottom of it. At 2 a.m., the pair made their way towards the gym, and were shocked. They could hear it. Without a doubt, that was the sound of a bouncing ball. They opened the heavy gym door and were again surprised. In the torchlight, they could clearly see the bouncing ball. Mr. Yasuda followed the bouncing ball's path and then screamed with realization. Megumi is practicing her underhand pass. At Mr. Yasuda's suggestion, the volleyball team held a match in Megumi's honor a few days later. they invited a monk from a nearby temple to hold a memorial service for her at the same time. And after that, they never heard the sound of a bouncing volleyball again. Midnight Runner. Daisuke-kun, a junior high third grader in the city, was never the strongest person. He often caught fevers, and if the cold was going around, he was always the first in his class to catch it. And he never got better from it. He always complained about how tired he felt, and he wasn't good at any sports. Being an only child, his parents were especially fussy with him, and so he wasn't exactly the strongest guy around. But then one day, suddenly, he declared, "I want to run." He saw some female marathon runners on TV, and despite the fact they didn't appear to be large or powerful, they were running their hearts out, and it inspired him. His parents were surprised and worried, but they told him, "Just try it a bit at a time. It's not like it's a team sport, so you can't exactly lose." And that very same night, he really did start running. At first, he just slowly ran around his house, but bit by bit, he ran further and further, all the way to the nearby park. Then, he ran to the big park even further away. And then finally, he ran all the way to Tokyo Bay, made his way towards school, went through the rear gate, and ran a lap around the schoolyard before going back home. Before long, this became his usual route. His health started to improve too. His complexion got better, and he stopped complaining so much about being tired. Even his grades started to improve. Of course, his parents were happy to see this, but the happiest person of all was Daisuke himself. His friends joked around with him. "You should join a race. If you reach the top, then you'll be on TV." He found himself getting carried away with them. "All right, you'll see me running through the tape. Just you watch. Make sure your videos are ready." He ran through the hall with his hands in the air, like he'd just crossed the finish line. He'd completely changed, and was now a kid full of energy. Even as they were deep in the test study period, he never gave up jogging. On the contrary, he studied until late, and after 10 p.m, he'd head out into the cold to run. "All right, let's have a little break." His mother was worried. "Things will backfire if you do too much. There are children who died after running when they were already tired. You should just take a break until tests are over," she said. But he just replied, "I feel bad if I don't run." He wanted to become a member of the track team in high school, and then he wanted to join a university with a strong track team as well. He even ended up buying some white jogging shoes with the money he received for New Year's. The latest Nike brand. He must have been so happy that day. He put the shoes on his desk and touched them several times while he was studying. That night, around 10 p.m, his mother heard him going outside like he always did as she lay in bed. Then, when she next woke up, it was 1:30 a.m. The light was still on in Daisuke-kun's room. She got up to tell him to go to sleep, but the room was empty. She grew extremely worried. He was always back by this time. Did something happen? Was he in an accident? She thought, and waited until 2 a.m. But he still didn't return. So she couldn't wait around any longer. She woke her husband up and they decided to check his usual running course. They went all the way to the park in the northerly winds, and then checked each of the paths between the trees. The park late at night in winter truly was dark, and the only lights were the nearby street lights. It felt like they were going to freeze. They also went to the banks of Tokyo Bay, but nobody was there. And then finally, when they reached the school, his mother exclaimed in surprise. Somebody was passed out by the rear gate. The person was wearing grey sweatpants and white jogging shoes. It was Daisuke-kun, and he was freezing to the touch. His arms lay out in front of him, just like a runner who had reached the finish line. He'd had a heart attack. A week after his funeral, there was a teacher working late at school. Once he was finally done, he made his way towards the rear gate to leave, when suddenly he sensed something strange. He didn't know why, but he turned to look at the school grounds. On the oval, he saw something white coming towards him with rhythmical footsteps. He watched in surprise. They were jogging shoes. The shoes Daisuke-kun had worn only once. The shoes he was buried with. The teacher watched in surprise as the shoes got closer. He could vaguely see grey sweatpants above the legs that ended at the knees. This silent runner with only legs turned near the teacher and then disappeared out the rear gate. After that, several people saw this runner with only legs. The rumours spread quickly, and hearing them, Daisuke-kun's parents set out that very night for the school. They couldn't help but feel sad for their only son, who was still running, even now. It was another night with a cold northerly wind. They didn't know how long they waited. Their bodies started to go numb as they waited in the corner of the large schoolyard. Yet neither of them wished to go home, and as they stood there, the wind seemed to suddenly stop. At that point, they heard the sound of shoes hitting the ground. Looking closer, they saw some white jogging shoes running on the track. "It's Daisuke. Keep it together and let's do this, okay?" his father said, tightly gripping the end of some tape he'd prepared and handing the other end to Daisuke's mother. The pair stood on either side of the track, and the shoes gradually got closer. They seemed to be heading towards the white tape. Soon, they saw grey sweatpants, then 2 arms up in the air, like the runner had won the race. And then, as they stared straight ahead, they vaguely saw a face as well. As the runner broke through the tape, he took another 2 or 3 steps before stopping. Then, the almost invisible face smiled and disappeared. The shoes on the track disappeared as well. After that, the midnight runner was never seen on the school grounds again. Sound in the principal's office. The weather had been ominous from the morning, and that evening it finally turned into a heavy downpour. On this particular day, one of the new male teachers stayed behind late at school alone, working on the program for the upcoming autumn school play. The plump night guard from the security company had just poked his head in and then left to patrol the school. The hands on the clock already pointed to 8 p.m. Looking outside, he could see it had just started to rain. "I should probably go home now while I can." He stretched and then let out a big yawn. But then suddenly, he heard a sound coming from the principal's office. Standing up, he opened the door to the principal's office and turned the lights on. In the fluorescent light, the glass door of the cupboard by the wall looked cold and shimmering. The principal's desk was by the window, and in front of that was a sofa, able to seat 5 or 6 people, and that was it. There wasn't any reason for anyone to be in the room at the time either. Confused, the teacher turned the lights off, closed the door, and returned to his seat. But then, he again heard a sound, like paper being crumpled. This time, he heard a deep sigh as well. It was a sad sound that mixed with the pouring rain outside. The teacher unconsciously stood up. "Who's there?" He flung the door open again and turned on the lights. But the principal's room fell silent once more. Suddenly, everything felt cold. The teacher shivered and then swallowed nervously. Panicking, he returned to his seat and prepared to go home. But then... he again heard that sigh. This time, much clearer than before. For a moment, the teacher froze, and the notebooks he was holding fell to his feet. As he crouched to pick them up, suddenly he heard a bang, and he screamed before he could stop himself. The door to the teacher's room then opened, and the plump security guard poked his face in. "Sir? Did something happen?" "I heard a scream." The principal's office." The teacher pointed to it with a trembling hand. "Ah, it's here, huh?" the guard said with a nod and a smile. He entered the teacher's room and then sat in a chair next to the teacher. The spirit of the principal from 4 generations ago still haunts this place. "Huh? The school principal's ghost?" "Yeah. I've been coming here for 2 years now, and it honestly surprised me at first. But it only makes sounds and doesn't hurt anyone, so, you know." The guard slowly lit a cigarette and started chatting. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was a passionate teacher who went on a ski trip with about 20 of his students and their parents. But one of the children suffered an injury there. Well, it wasn't a big injury, and they quickly treated it. But it appeared in the newspaper, and so the principal was questioned quite intensely by the education department. "Why did you not cancel it beforehand?" If children are to be taken off the school grounds, the principal must first ask for permission from the Board of Education, you know. Anyway, he did ask, but it was denied. But the principal wanted to encourage the young, passionate teacher, so he told him that it was approved. "It's fine. If I were younger, I'd love to join you," he said. That's right. He encouraged him. After the accident, the principal stayed behind late each night writing apologies and accident reports. One morning, when the reports were finally done, they found him passed out on top of his desk. He was dead. No, he didn't harm himself. He was just that exhausted. You saw, didn't you? This happened during the start of the Showa period, so more than 60 years ago now. 3 students at a teaching school in Akita, Nakagawa, Sakata, and Ishiyama, all shared a single room. One night, around 2 a.m, Sakata quietly left the room. Nakagawa noticed, but he thought he was just going to the toilet, so he didn't pay it much mind and got comfortable under the covers again. But once you wake up, it's kind of hard to go back to sleep again. An hour or so must have passed, but Nakagawa started to worry when Sakata didn't return. He went to the toilets and knocked on each door, but there was no response. Maybe he went to visit a friend's room on the way back, he thought, and went back to their room. As morning broke, Sakata finally returned. It seemed he'd already eaten, as he was wiping his mouth clean with a cloth. He seemed to nervously watch his 2 roommates, and Nakagawa missed his chance to ask what happened. Once it was time to go to class, Sakata was still acting different to usual. He remained silent, his eyes downcast. This repeated itself on several other nights, and Nakagawa told Ishiyama about it. But Ishiyama didn't believe him. Maybe you just dreamt it. That night, as the wall clock indicated that it was 2 a.m, Sakata snuck out of the room as usual. Nakagawa quickly put on some pants and a jumper, and then followed him. Sakata went straight for the toilets. Nakagawa followed, and then knocked on each door. Yet there was no response. Fearing he might be passed out inside, he opened each door, but nobody was there. Then, when he opened the 4th door, he realized the top window was half open. Thinking he might have escaped, he climbed up to look out and noticed Sakata nervously looking around as he made his way towards the graveyard. It was a full moon, so there was no doubt about it. It was Sakata. What on earth is he doing this late at night? Nakagawa ran out of the dorms and after Sakata. He had heard that Sakata's father had passed away, so maybe his grave was here. But even if so, why would he visit this late at night? Nakagawa hid behind the wall of tombstones and watched Sakata. He suddenly pulled out a shovel from somewhere and started digging up one of the graves. It seemed to be a new one, as the wooden grave tablet looked new, and the lantern also hadn't been destroyed yet. In the moonlight, he could clearly see the family crest. Then, finally, Sakata grabbed something inside the coffin. He's stealing something precious to the dead person. Maybe a ring, a watch, or perhaps even money. Holding his breath, Nakagawa quietly screamed inside. Sakata was chewing and sucking on a bone. Then he suddenly turned around. Nakagawa turned pale and ran back to the dorms before diving under the covers. The next morning, Sakata returned. He walked over to Ishiyama's bed and put his hand under the blanket. "It's warm," he muttered. Then he touched Nakagawa's blanket. "Oh, it's cold." He jumped on Nakagawa and started squeezing his neck with incredible power. "You were the one who saw me, weren't you?" With all his might, Nakagawa threw Sakata off. He slammed into the door and fell to the ground. The next morning, they found him hanging from a pine tree in the dorm gardens. It turned out that Sakata was gravely ill. He had heard and believed that eating human bones could help. So that's why. Nakagawa and Ishiyama hugged each other and cried. Where is the Midnight Ghost? This happened about 15 years ago. Us security guards worked nights in various places around the city, such as company buildings, schools, etc. We drove to each location at set times, one after the other. Our nights and days were opposite to most regular people, but the toughest part was how cold it was during winter. Cold, harsh winds blew through the city from the north, and patrolling in the snow was awful. Early one winter morning, as dawn broke, I finished my patrol, and once I submitted my report to the office, I returned to the break room to get ready to go home. One of my colleagues who had also finished his patrol looked at me and then whispered, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something. Do you mind?" He sounded desperate, like something was greatly bothering him. "Sure." We left the building and went to a cafe that was open in the early mornings at the nearby station. After they put our coffees down on the table inside the warm store, he finally started talking. "Well, you see, it's about a ghost." "Huh? A ghost?" "There's this school I patrol at midnight each night and there's a ghost there," he said. "Tell me more." I urged him to continue. "It wouldn't end well for a security guard to be afraid of ghosts, right? Plus, we're right in the middle of winter. I can't say anything to the head office. It's gotten to the point where I'm thinking of quitting," he said, his eyes downcast. Could such a terrifying ghost in the middle of winter really exist that had pushed him this far? The story went like this. Around 1 a.m, he arrived at the school. After doing a quick round of the school, he checked each entrance and exit for anything strange. This school was currently undergoing renovations, so he also had to check the construction area. But recently, as he neared the construction site each night, he could hear a voice crying. "It almost sounds like it's waiting for me to arrive. It sounds so sad and full of pain. They're the wails of a woman." There was no way a woman could be on a construction site at midnight in the middle of winter. That was what he thought, so he asked around to find out what existed on that site before the school was built. Apparently, it used to be a cemetery. That's why it has to be the ghost of a woman with a grudge against this world. Once he was done with the story, he continued. Is she trying to draw me in with her tears so she can make me have an accident on patrol? Is she going to make the workers during the day have an accident? That's what ghosts do, right? He said, his eyes serious. And then he shook his head, saying he couldn't get the sound of the crying out of his ears. I told him he was just imagining it, trying to ease his mind, but it didn't work. He couldn't just wait and see what happened any longer either. Let's go back to that school tonight with several men and check it out, I said. I asked 2 other guards I was good friends with and, keeping it a secret from the company, we decided to check it out that night. At 1 a.m, as we juggled our patrols, we got on the road and made our way to the school, where everyone gathered at the front gate. The schoolyard was pitch black. He led us with his torch aimed at our feet, and we approached the construction site just a short distance from the main school building. He stopped and then whispered, "See? I can hear it." For sure, I could hear crying coming from somewhere. He wasn't just hearing things. He turned the torch off and the 4 of us finally pressed on. "I wonder where it is," someone muttered. Chills ran up and down my spine, and it wasn't just because of the cold northerly wind. The woman's indescribable crying continued. My entire body froze over. Over there? One of the guys turned his gaze towards a sudden ray of light. A steel frame had been set up, with pipes beneath it for footing. The sobbing continued. We turned towards the light as we followed the sound with our ears. Everyone else turned their lights on and looked around the construction area. "Turn your lights off," he said quietly, but forcefully. We didn't know why he said that, but maybe he saw something in the darkness. Maybe the ghost. For a moment, the 4 of us held our breath and stared into the darkness. Then, the northerly wind blew through heavily. The sobbing grew even louder for a moment. Then, the wind weakened, and the sobbing got quieter. "The wind," I muttered. "It's just the wind," turning my torch on and walking over to the steel frame. "The wind is blowing through the steel. That's what's making the sound. It just sounds like a woman crying," I said, and the other 3 also approached different areas of the steel frame. As the wind blew, some parts made loud noises, while others didn't. At any rate, being glad it was just the wind, we all got back in our cars and made our way back into the city. As spring arrived, the renovations were finally done at that school. But for a while, that guard still came to talk to me after finishing his nightly patrol. I can still hear the sobbing. As I pass through the corner of the building, I can hear it. The flame at Bozu Rock. The junior high Keikun attended was right next to a mountain. It wasn't a very large mountain, but there was a cliff that ran basically perpendicular to the school that people called Bozu Rock. It was a great place to practice rock climbing, so outsiders often visited the area to use it. A train line ran right beneath it, so a fence surrounded the school grounds in front of it. And the school building stood parallel to that train line. That was why it was easy to see the rock climbers scaling that cliff with their heavy gear from the school windows. But Bozu Rock not only looked difficult to climb, in reality, it actually was difficult to climb as well. It was a scary place where several people had even fallen while climbing and died. There was a statue by the school grounds and train lines that people called Satoru-kun's statue. A boy around the same height as a junior high student stood on the pedestal, holding a book in his left hand. He faced the schoolyard, meaning his back was to Bozu Rock. Nobody knew who put the statue there, nor how long it had been there. Nobody knew why it was called Satoru-kun either. I feel like it just showed up one day, the janitor who had long been at the school said. Rumours claimed he was a boy who was hit whilst riding his bike, or he was a student who loved school but was hospitalised and died of an illness. Some stories even claimed it was a memorial statue for a boy who died in an air raid during the war. That was apparently how old it was, and perhaps that was why there were so many strange rumours surrounding it. Some of those rumours claimed its eyes glow at midnight. Sometimes it changes the direction it's facing. Apparently a friend of a friend saw it walking around the school grounds. Children all throughout the school had heard these stories. And so, some of the boys from the soccer club, which Kei-kun was a part of, wanted to see for themselves whether the rumours were true or not. During their summer training camp, they all stayed in the school gym. If something really was up with Satoru-kun, then they would be able to take a photo of it. On the first day of the training camp, Kei-kun made sure to have his camera with him. The gym was located on the right-hand side of the school grounds, right between the train line and the main school building. "We sure are lucky we're near Satoru-kun," the club members said at first, but before long, everyone got bored. Simply staring at the school grounds wasn't very interesting. Before long, they started to mess around, arm wrestling each other and having pillow fights, and they soon forgot all about Satoru-kun. And before long, one or two of them fell asleep. After midnight, Kei-kun realized he was the only one still awake. Right as he was about to go to bed, he decided to look at the statue one more time out of curiosity. Huh? He was shocked. Beneath the dark Bozu rock, there was a single light, like a round orange flame. What on earth was that? There was no way anyone had come to the cliff at this time of night, but as he watched it, the flame moved upwards, and it was pretty fast. Right as it neared the top, suddenly it fell all the way back down, and at the same time, numerous orange flames lit up all around the cliff face. They wavered like neon lights in the rain. "Oh, I have to wake everyone up," he thought. But then he realized he couldn't move. Not his legs, nor his arms. He couldn't even speak either. He could only move his eyes, and then he suddenly realized something. He could see Satoru-kun's back. Satoru-kun was looking at Bozu Rock. The balls of light then started moving up one by one. Wavering, they climbed the dark rock one after the other. Then, as the last one reached the top, they all went out at once, and Kei-kun was able to move again. Satoru-kun was also facing the school once again, but now his eyes were glowing. However, they soon stopped as well. The next day, a climber on Bozu Rock died. It was a high school student who loved mountains, and he fell just a short distance from the top. The story of what Kei-kun saw spread around the school, and yet another bad rumor regarding Satoru-kun was born. If the statue faces Bozu Rock with glowing eyes, then someone will fall and die. But Kei-kun didn't think that was the truth. When Satoru-kun's eyes lit up, he wasn't sure why, but it seemed to him like they were tears, and he was actually crying. Doll with blue eyes. Ko, ko, ko. Schools at night are scary places. Naturally, they're silent, and nobody is around. Mr. Yamamoto was on night duty that day, and walked around the first floor with a torch in hand, before climbing the creaky stairs. he could hear his own footsteps again. Ko, ko, ko. And then the window glass suddenly rattled. He jumped in surprise and looked around. That was the wind just now, right? He muttered to himself, the sound getting sucked into the darkness. Shaking his head, he started walking again. But then he heard a faint voice. Mama! Mama! Was it a cat? No. But if not, then what was it? He heard it again. Mama! He couldn't bear it any longer. Mr. Yamamoto spun to the right and went back down the stairs. Then, when he reached the night duty room, he dove under the covers and went to sleep. The next morning, the events of the previous night seemed like a dream. He washed his face with cold water, then poured some over his head as well, before drying himself with a towel. He decided not to mention anything about the night before to anyone. They'll just spread rumours that I'm a coward if I do, he muttered. At any rate, he only started working at this school last April. He'd rather cut his mouth open than tell people he heard a weird voice at night screaming, "Mama, Mama." Several days passed, and then it was his turn for night duty again. Thanks for all your hard work today, Mr. Yamamoto. Mr. Kawakami, one of the teachers who had long been at the school, said as he walked over to him. By the way, are you patrolling while you're on duty? Yes, I am. Even the second floor? Yes, the second floor too. Is that so? And nothing has happened up there? Huh? Mr. Yamamoto froze. He debated whether he should mention the strange voice he heard, but then Mr. Kawakami nodded his head, as though he already knew. So, you heard the strange cat-like, but not quite cat-like voice that says "Mama," then? Huh? So then, I'm not the only one who heard it? That's right. That's why none of us patrol the second floor anymore. Well, it's not really something we can say out loud, but it really creeps me out. That night, Mr. Yamamoto couldn't sleep. He did a quick patrol and then got back under the covers to sleep, but he couldn't get that voice out of his head. I've definitely heard that voice somewhere before. Where had he heard it? As he was thinking about it, he fell asleep. Ko, 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 ko. Next thing he knew, Mr. Yamamoto had a torch in hand and was slowly walking up the stairs. But I don't want to go to the second floor, he screamed inside. Yet still he proceeded upwards. Ko, ko, ko. When he reached the top of the stairs, he turned right. Then he heard faint footsteps coming from the end of the second floor hall. Ko, ko, ko. They were definitely footsteps, but they were small and didn't sound like the footsteps of an adult. A child. No, something smaller than a child. Like a cat, but if it were a cat, then it wouldn't make footsteps. Confused, Mr. Yamamoto froze on the spot. He turned his torchlight to the sound of those footsteps and, in the ring of light, he saw what was approaching. It was a Western-style doll. A girl with blonde hair, wearing a brimmed hat and cute pleated clothes, and she even had shoes on as well. With her blue eyes open, the doll walked straight ahead. Ko, ko, ko. Mama! 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 Her voice echoed, and Mr. Yamamoto suddenly jolted awake in bed. Was I dreaming? But it was so real, and he grabbed his head in confusion. He was covered in sweat. All right, I get it. That voice was coming from the doll. When he was a child, his sister had one that she loved, and when you put it down face up, it would say, Mama. But why? Why? Why was it on the second floor of the school saying Mama? The thoughts ran through his head over and over, but he couldn't come up with an answer. Then, on the third day, as he was eating dinner, the old woman from the boarding house said to him, confused, "Mr. Yamamoto, is something wrong? You always seem lost in thought lately." "Oh? Is that so?" He couldn't exactly say that the school was haunted. He glanced at the old woman and she was smiling at him like he was her young son. Suddenly, he wanted to tell her everything. "No, well, you see, when I'm on night duty here, She leaned forward, nodding as she was listening. And so, Mr. Yamamoto told her all about the strange voice he heard while he was on night duty. Once he was done, he suddenly felt embarrassed. "Sorry for making you listen to such a boring story," he said. But when he looked at her face, he was surprised. She looked most serious and appeared to be thinking about something. "Mr. Yamamoto." She sat back down and then spoke. "I might know something about that doll. Please come to the school roof with me tomorrow." "Huh? What are you saying?" "Yes, that's right. Please don't ask me anything else today. I'll tell you everything tomorrow once I've confirmed what it is." Once the children left school the next day, the woman from the boarding house made her way to the school. Then she dragged Mr. Yamamoto with her to the sewing class on the second floor. "Mr. Yamamoto, this was my classroom. I used to work here, and I taught sewing. One day, as the wall was heating up, I removed a plank of wood from the ceiling in that closet, and I hid something inside. I was young then. I did it alone." At some point, Mr. Kawakami had shown up as well, and was listening to her talk. "Please, could you check for me? The plank was somewhere around there. Please remove it. There should be a single wooden box behind it." Mr. Yamamoto nodded, took off his shoes, and then climbed into the closet. Just like she said, one of the ceiling planks moved. Mr. Kawakami held up a torch for him to see. Sticking his head up into the ceiling, he found it. "Ah, here it is." He grabbed the single wooden box. They opened the dusty box and inside was something wrapped in old newspaper. The old woman carefully removed it from the top. Finally, they could see what was inside. "That's it! That's the doll!" Mr. Yamamoto screamed. That doll he had seen walking down the hall at night was definitely this same one. As the old woman lifted the doll, a voice spilt from its lips like it had been waiting to see her. "Mama! Mama!" "Ah! That voice!" Mr. Kawakami trembled, but the old woman held the doll tight, like it was her own child. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Please forgive me for not coming to get you after the war ended. You were hidden up there that whole time. That's why you were crying, Mama, Mama. Right, Julie-chan? I'm so sorry." The old woman cried as she held the doll. Then she told them the origins of the doll. In 1927, a doll envoy from America came to Japan in order to befriend Japanese children. Everyone sang songs together and celebrated, and then the many dolls were distributed to schools around Japan, where they were taken care of. But in 1937, the war with China began, and in 1941, the war with America began. "That doll with blue eyes is an American doll, the doll of our enemies. Destroy them, burn them all." At schools all over the country, dolls with blue eyes were destroyed, tossed into the ocean, or burnt. People were demanding the same thing here as well. I felt bad for this little one, so I secretly put her in a box and then hid her in the roof. So that's what happened, Mr. Yamamoto thought as he looked at Julie-chan. The blue-eyed doll cried for her mama because she wanted out. Julie-chan was then put on display in the school library. Apparently, she's still there, even now. Late night footsteps. This is a story I heard from my older brother. I don't want to believe in ghosts, but once I heard his story, I started to wonder if maybe they do exist. My brother attended S University for 4 years, living in the dorms there. Even now, those dorms are still surrounded by trees, and even during the day, it's dark and damp there. 8 years ago, when my brother was there, the buildings were old and dilapidated, and there was an old well as well, so it was a pretty sad place. This happened during the summer of his second year, during the old Bon festival. There were lots of students in the dorms from around the countryside, so during Obon, many of them returned home. And so, the dorms would empty, and at night, would fall scarily quiet. On this particular night, my older brother was the only one still there, with 2 older students. It was too scary to stay alone, so the 3 of them got together in one room and stayed up late, chatting and drinking. Then, late that night, they heard the sounds of shoes clicking somewhere. What on earth was going on? My brother got up and quietly opened the door. Under the naked lights in the hall, he noticed a war horse passing by. A commissioned officer sat atop the horse, and behind that, he saw nothing but the legs of numerous soldiers wearing gaiters, walking in unison. Gah! He ran back to the other 2 and was so afraid that he closed his eyes. He wasn't sure how much time passed, but when he opened his eyes again, the final footsteps seemed to be dragging by. It wasn't just my brother who saw the ghosts. The other 2 apparently saw them as well, so I think it must have been real. And apparently, the dorms at S University used to be used as dorms and a hospital for soldiers, so no doubt numerous injured soldiers died there. I heard that there's a ghost in the old well too, but my older brother doesn't really want to talk about that. I can't get this rust off. I was attending a high school in H City, Hokkaido at the time. Most of the buildings at this school were new, but the gym alone was old, and you had to pass through a long hall from the new school building to reach it. There was an old tea room by the side of the gym, and the sports team stayed there when they had training camps. And across the hall, opposite the tea room, there was a coal shed that's no longer in use. This coal shed was a pretty creepy building even during the day, and whenever students used the hall, they did their best not to look at it. So, one summer, us volleyball club members stayed in that tea room for our training camp. Once training was done and we'd eaten dinner, we all went to bed early in preparation for the next day. But late that night, I woke up needing to go to the toilet. I didn't especially feel like going down the hall alone to reach the toilet though. And so, I woke up the captain, A, who was sleeping next to me. "What the hell, man? You're such a coward." He smiled bitterly, but he walked with me to the toilet. The hall that was creepy even during the day creaked as we walked, and then, as we passed the coal shed, I heard a small noise. It was strange, like something being scraped across metal. I grabbed the captain before I could stop myself and started trembling. At the same time, I heard a faint voice. "I can't get this rust off. I can't get this rust off." All I could do was tremble, frozen in fear. I'm gonna pass out. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, my trusty captain stepped in. "Hey, who's over there?" he screamed towards the shed. When he did, the sound and the voice immediately stopped. Several days passed, and then I heard something from the janitor, who had worked at the school for a long time. It was around the end of the Pacific War, around 1945 maybe, but members of the ground forces were stationed here. There was a soldier in this unit who was unable to walk, and one of his superior officers always bullied him, calling him names like blockhead and trash. One day, that officer told the soldier to get the rust off this gun, and made him sandpaper it off. But when he saw that soldier's work, he said, "What's this? You call this removing the rust? It hasn't come off at all." He harshly told him off. Then he locked him in that coal shed. But unfortunately, that day there was an air raid. All the other soldiers fled. They only remembered that he was still there a few days later, and when they returned and opened the coal shed, they found he was already dead. After that, people heard strange sounds coming from the shed, and a voice saying, "I can't get this rust off." Who are you? I work for an elementary school in Nagano Prefecture. One day, I invited an old woman to join us for a social studies lesson. She had long lived near the school, but during the Pacific War, she suffered terribly in China and almost died. I thought I would have the children listen to her talk so they could come to better understand the war. During the war, this school didn't yet exist. There were around 20 houses here where everyone lived. Everyone was poor and life was hard. The old woman began her story. At the time, Japan was advancing into China and Korea, killing people, burning houses, claiming land, and doing all sorts of unbelievably horrific acts. And it wasn't just the armed forces. In order to reclaim land from China, Japan sent numerous farmers and their families, as well as those specializing in railways and such, across the ocean. The old woman was sent to China soon after she got married to be a teacher, and she gave birth to 4 of her own children while she was there. But Japan ended up losing the war, right? Well, the armed forces fled right away. They left us women and children behind, and we put our lives on the line over several months trying to return by ourselves. Having lost the war, Japan was now chased out by China. Weak children with nothing to eat died. Unable to flee anywhere, one group gassed themselves, both adults and children alike. When it comes to war, there are always unarmed women and children who die as well. It's a terrible thing. The old woman kept going with her horrifying tale. She heard of a mother who attempted to escape the country on a roofless goods train, yet her child's crying was so noisy that she feared what might happen if they were discovered, and so she was forced to silence them for good. That mother had originally lived in this very same area. That woman, she finally made it all the way to Kyushu, where she then passed away. How sad. The children held their breath as they listened. Most of the people who lived here before this school was built, they were told that they could escape poverty if they moved to China, and because they believed that, they were unable to ever come back. Can you imagine how much they must have wanted to return? Choking up, the old woman finished her story. That day, I was so bogged down in work that next thing I knew, it was so late that I wouldn't make the last bus. This happened 2 or 3 times a year. And when it did, I would spend the night in the nurse's office. Oh well, it's been a while, but I'll just have to stay in the nurse's office, I thought. I gave up on going home and, with a heavy heart, I prepared for the next day's lessons. By the time I crawled into the white bed in the nurse's office, it was almost midnight. I was terribly exhausted, and yet I couldn't get to sleep. I twisted and turned for a while, and it seemed that finally I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but at some point something heavy suddenly fell on my chest. Groaning, I woke up. When I opened my eyes, I tried to get up, but something was pushing against me, and I was unable to move. I couldn't even move a single toe. Am I suffering from sleep paralysis? Strangely, I was able to think clearly. I realized I was sweating all over, and then I heard the small sound of something moving around the room that only I was supposed to be in. My mind was thinking clearly, yet my body wouldn't move. I can't tell you how difficult that was. It was a faint voice, like a baby. Then again, I heard that sound. Peta peta, peta peta. Unable to move, I let my eyes roam the room, looking for the owner of that voice. Then I saw a faint light behind the curtain separating the beds. And the black silhouette of a person appeared. Even if I wanted to scream, I couldn't. I was so scared that I almost couldn't breathe. And under my breath, I was finally able to mutter some desperate words. "Who are you?" At that moment, the figure and the sounds disappeared. I was able to move again, and I couldn't stop shaking. Because it seemed like I'd seen that mother and child from the old woman's story that day. I never stayed in the nurse's office again after that.